1, 2, testing. All right, I think we are live. Just double check this. Hello to anyone who's there. I'm just checking my second stream to see what's going on at the moment. It looks like I'm coming through gently. Let's see. All right, I got 2 viewers. That means I'm mom and brother. It's gone up to 6 viewers. All right. So we're going to start in about 5 minutes time. I've got the chat box open here for YouTube live. And if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat box just while we wait, I'll read out some of the comments as we go. I can't reply directly to the chat box, but I will reply in the video here. So yeah, feel free to pop your name in there and we'll just wait for 5 minutes for everyone to dive in. Yeah. Don't be shy. Also, apologies to anyone that was waiting for it from an hour ago. Turns out there's this thing in Europe called daylight saving. Ended up with the wrong time zone. So it's a little bit off, but we're here now. And luckily this is all recorded, so anyone can watch this afterwards if they do end up missing it. But yeah, for the people that are waiting now, just pop a message in the chat box, and we'll get going soon. Right, I've got myself on 2 different screens just in case. Let me just double check things. Oh, hi, Janine. Thanks for joining us. You're probably going to get a bit of repeat of the strategic thinking course. I'm sure it'll be nice to have a bit of a refresher. All right, we're going to start in about 2 or 3 minutes. Hi, David. I'm excited to have you on board. For anyone that's wondering, Debbie's my mom. She's joined us for the video today. I've also got her on standby in case anything goes wrong, just as a backup plan. So thanks for joining. All right. I'm going to slowly start talking about what we're going to be going through today, but with no specific look into the content. So basically, just as an overview, very broadly, is that strategy is often something that people conflate with like big business or wartime stuff or something that can be, quite intense and terrifying. And so what I really want to do in this session is I'm going to hopefully be demystifying what we understand by strategy and bringing it down to a level that's applicable to anyone. And you can see that it really is not that complicated a concept. And then we're going to be applying it to some development tools as we go along. So we're going to look at 2 specific cases, the Bulungula Incubator and the Clothing Bank, as our sort of case studies. And then we're going to be going through a couple of the strategic thinking tools that we teach in the course. So that's what we have to look forward to today. I'm going to be aiming to keep it at about 45 minutes and leave some time at the end for maybe overlap or questions. So if you have any questions, you can either save them for the end or I'll keep an eye on the chat feed and just monitor that. And I'll be happy to answer questions during the chat as well. For anyone that's just joined us, I've seen a couple of people have just come on board. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. We're just going to wait a minute or 2 to get going. Yeah, as soon as we've got a couple more people on board, we'll get going. Hello, Catherine Dodge. Good to have you on board. also, I think, also a former student from the class, so I'll be getting some nice refreshers on the course. Yeah, it's exciting. Right, so we're exactly at 3 o'clock South African time. So I'm going to just start giving an introduction to myself, just allowing some people to catch up. So just on my background, I am a lecturer in strategic thinking and business management courses at the University of Cape Town in Cape Town, South Africa. I've been in the sort of lecturing scene about 2 or 3 years. I worked as an assistant lecturer last year and the year before. This is my first year as a proper lecturer, a big boy lecturer. And my initial background is in business science. I studied a business degree and then went and did a postgrad in accounting, and then changed completely and went into development studies, economic development specifically. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I've been doing some really exciting projects, a bit of consulting work in economic development. I've worked with startups, one of them being my own. And I've been doing sort of all projects along the side. I was fortunate to meet one of the global changemakers at a conference last year called Brightest Young Minds. So shout out to Courtney for introducing me to the global changemakers and for bringing me on board to chat to you guys today. I see we've got another person in the chat box there. Hey, Bianca. Good to see you're on board. All right. Okay. So gone through a little bit of an introduction. We're 2 or 3 minutes over into the start of this, and I'm going to start sharing my screen. Just going to check that this works, and then we can start going into the presentation. All right, that's let's try and move on to this slide here. Let's get this show going. Tabo's joined us too. Super excited to have you on board, Tabo. All right, let's see. Make this present here. All right, so for those of you just joining us, we've got a good number of people watching us now. So welcome to the Global Changemakers webinar course. My name is Rowan Spazolli. I've given a brief introduction, but if you want to sort of see more about me, I've got my website listed below and social media sites there. And today I'm going to be speaking about strategy and strategy specifically in the context of solving global challenges. So looking how we can apply strategic thinking and strategy into the problems that we see that are very evident today. And just a note on this. So one of the things I often see with global development sort of things, or especially in social development, is a lot of sort of good-hearted, like really, really incredible work. But taking that next level sort of critical thinking up can really, really enable impact. So what we're going to try and do here is sort of equip people with tools to understand different ways of forming strategies, different ways about thinking about strategies, so that we can leverage our impact, so that our passion meets excellence, and really so that we can have a bit bigger impact on the world. Alrighty. So just to go through the webinar plan, this is the schedule for today. We're going to start off with some very classic strategy work. We're looking at the definition of strategy. We're going to ask what is strategy. We're going to ask we're going to look at the basic framework that I use in my course, and then a little bit of background on the origins of strategy, specifically looking at wartime strategy, and with a brief story on Isan Gluana, a battle that took place in South Africa. Then we're going to move on to my favorite strategic thinking tool, which is the Rumelt framework. It's based on a chapter in Rich Rumelt's book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and we use it thoroughly in the course that I lecture on. And then I'm going to apply that framework to the Bulungula incubator, and we're going to have a discussion around that. And then I'm going to equip you with 2 other tools. One of them is called the Map the System tool, or the Impact Gap Canvas, and that's going to be really interesting to look through. and then we're going to look at theory of change and apply that to clothing bank. And then I'm going to give about 10 minutes at the end just to for questions and anything else that we need. Just in terms of the resources for this webinar, so there are two sets of resources that I've made available. The first is on my blog. You can find it at tinyurl.com/GCM strategy. And there you'll find every organization that I refer to, every sort of little tool that I refer to will be available there for you to look at. And you can look at it now, it's live at the moment. And then these slides are available for download there, and you're welcome to share them freely. Secondly, if you would like to join a WhatsApp chat either now or later on, I'd have one running at the moment. If you go onto your phone and type in tinyurl.com/GCM strat chat, you can join us on the WhatsApp chat, and feel free to come and go as you need to. We can almost continue the conversation in there at the end. Alrighty, so we're going to dive in now. We've waited about 5 minutes for everyone, and it's good to have all of you on board now. It's exciting to see that there's a nice turnout. And we're going to start off with the defining strategy section. So one of the sort of big names in strategy is a guy called Sir Lawrence Friedman, and he writes an epic book called Strategy: A History. And we use this quote quite frequently on our course. And the sort of description we use for strategy here is that strategy is about getting more out of the situation than the starting balance of power would suggest. It's the art of creating power. Now, that seems like quite a sort of intense way of describing it, but it's almost leveraging yourself into a better position than you would have been before. And so that's why we've got the explanation down there. Simply put, strategy is about a creative approach to getting yourself into a more powerful position while navigating a changing environment. And that's an important one because, you know, the difference between, and this is a question that's often asked in the course, is the difference between a plan and a strategy is that with a plan, you've got a very certain environment. So if you have a plan for the day, there's 4 or 5 things which might happen, and often your plan can get messed up. But strategies are supposed to take into account a shifting environment. And then if the quality of your actions are linked to the quality of the thinking, then strategic thinking is likely to result for us to be in a more powerful position over time. There's another definition we like to use from David J. Collis from a publication called Thinking Strategically. And this one describes it as basically that strategic thinking is about analyzing opportunities and problems from a broad perspective and understanding the potential impact your action might have on others. Strategic thinkers visualize what might or could be and take a holistic approach to day-to-day issues. And they make this an ongoing process rather than a one-time event. And as I said there, before, when we talk about strategy, it's not something that happens once off. This is a major critique that I've sort of discussed with my class, is that, for example, universities, organizations will often have a plan that they put together, a strategy document that they put together once every 5 years. And for me, that lack of dynamicness in a strategy is ultimately what leads to those documents not ever realizing their potential. So what I like to do, the easiest way to think about strategy are these 3 questions. And if you've been in my course, you'll probably know that these 3 questions pop up all the time. And those 3 questions are, where are we now? Where do we want to be? And how do we get there? And basically, if you wanted to, you could stop watching now, because that's all the strategy. We're done there, finished. Now, so the reason we use this framework is that it simplifies things quite a bit. And ultimately, what you're doing with strategy is, in part 1, where are we now? You're looking at the problem and you're analyzing and understanding your environment. What you really want to understand is, what are the components that are going on? What are the problems that exist? You could use basic tools like a SWOT analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Whatever it is, you need to take a deep dive into understanding your context. And so if you go to major consulting companies, you'll see that the majority of their personnel often spend their time on this question, where are we now? And you've got groups and groups of analysts that come in and properly understand what the context is and relay that to the decision makers. The second is really important because it's sort of setting your objective, understanding what do you ultimately want to achieve. And so this can be something as simple as a statement, or it can be a deep analysis of where you'd like to end up. And then finally, your steps on how do we get there. So a strategy with just the first 2 points doesn't have the bridging to get from one point to the other. So essentially what you're analyzing is, we're at point 1, we're going to point 2, what is the path that's going to get us there? And if you keep this framework in mind and make sure that your strategies are built on this sort of framework, you're really it's the best way to sort of go forward. So we're going to take a little look into the origins of strategy. If I neglected this, any classic strategist would be sad, because this is where the sort of original stuff, where the foundations of strategy come from. So in Lawrence Friedman's book, he talks about the word strategy coming from the Greek word strategos, which means art of the general. And probably one of the most famous books on strategy is Sun Tzu's Art of War, an ancient book from China. It's the first sort of written evidence of military strategy. And so a lot of people enjoy analyzing military strategy and applying it to corporations. The things that we need to keep in mind, though, when looking at military strategy is that there's a lot of things that are different when it comes to implementing it. So first of all, the type of competition is different. Often in the current world, collaboration is better than direct competition or trying to kill off your enemies. Employees can quit, so you can't really treat them as badly as we want. But soldiers often are compulsorily indentured. And then size is an important factor in the success in a war, whereas size is usually the result of success in business. And so you can always have a very small business making it massive. And just because it's a massive business doesn't mean it's going to win. That's just a basic outline on what the origins of strategy are. What I'd like to do to explain this is to go through the story of the Battle of Isandlwana. So for background on this, the Battle of Isandlwana was fought during the Anglo-Zulu War, the end of the 18th century, end of the 19th century. And I'm going to take this I'm going to go over this quite quickly, but I've also left a link in my blog where you can go and check out the full story. So basically what happened here was the British were going into the Zulu kingdom, and they wanted to take control of the whole Zulu kingdom. And there was a very, very strong force of British soldiers moving in there. One of the first battles that had happened a little while before this battle, the Zulu army got completely overwhelmed. And the reason for that is that they were going in with spears and shields and some muskets, but not very sophisticated things. And they couldn't even get close enough to the British to affect them. And so this resulted in two sort of different mindsets. First, the British thought they were unstoppable. And second, the Zulu realized that if they were going to make a change, if they were going to even have an impact on the British army, they needed to do something different. And so what happened is that at Isandlwana, the British army, the sort of squadron that was there set up, there were about 1,000 men with some of the best artillery and rockets and guns that were available at the time. And what happened is that they didn't set up a proper defense, and possibly one of the best strategic maneuvers took place in history. It was from the point from when the Zulus arrived at the battle to the end. It ended up becoming the probably one of the biggest British defeats in history. So how did the Zulu do this? So what basically happened is that they knew they needed to get close. Hand-on-hand combat ultimately win the battle for the Zulus. So they managed to march 25,000 people in absolute dead silence right up to the camp of where the British were camped out, and they hid behind a hill in silence. And they got discovered at one point and rushed over that hill and started confronting the British. But the maneuver was that they sent a lot of the sort of strongest, fittest warriors out of the front, but the quickest ones went around. And what happened at the time with your British army is that they would always fight on one front. And the Zulu army had realized this. They realized they needed to get close. They realized they couldn't just fight them on one front. And so they pulled what's now known as the sort of buffalo or the bull strategy. So if you can see at the top of the screen, let me see if I can get a point out. So over here was the sort of main line of attack, with the blue being the Zulu army. And they sent squadrons of really, really quick people around the other side and basically closed the British army in up against the hill Isandwana. And the entire British army that was there was defeated. And what was really eerie about it is as the last few people were being caught and killed, there was actually a solar eclipse, which sort of must have made it a really, really dramatic scene. But what we can learn from this in a very basic way is that the Zulu knew they were in a less powerful position. And what essentially they did, which was a sort of a strategic masterstroke, was that they managed to put themselves in a position where all of their strengths, their ability with speed, their ability at close-hand combat were brought to the fore, and ultimately it left the British being defeated. So that's just a basic overview of the history of strategy. If you're interested in that sort of thing, I would definitely recommend looking at the Cyril Lawrence Freeman's book. He's also got an incredible talk on it. And if you have any questions at this point, feel free to pop them into the WhatsApp group, or, well, actually probably better into the YouTube live feed. So having that background, the biggest question that I get asked is, then how do we develop a strategy? You can analyze strategies that have existed. You can look at them and say, that Zulu strategy was incredible. But how do I get there? And so what we provide for the students in our course is possibly one of the most brilliant strategic frameworks available. And we call it the Rumelt framework. It comes from Richard Rumelt's book, and the book is called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And this framework is called the kernel of good strategy. And there's three components to the Rumelt framework. The first is diagnosis. So the way he puts it is that a diagnosis that defines or explains the nature of the challenge. A good diagnosis simplifies the often overwhelming complexity of reality by identifying certain aspects of the situation as critical. And so what we have here is basically, as I was discussing earlier, it's really important to analyze and understand what the components of the existing landscape, analyzing what's going down on the ground as being a really, really important part of a strategy. And so your diagnosis, in the same way that if you went to a doctor and you had a runny nose and a cough, they wouldn't say that your diagnosis is a running nose. That would be obviously a symptom of it. You'd be diagnosed with a flu or, that sort of thing. And so really what you want to do with a diagnosis is go beyond symptoms, go beyond the obvious, and really understand what the problem is at its core. The second component to the Rumelt framework is called the policy. Now, your guiding policy is for dealing with the challenge. It's an overall approach. And the steps, oh, hold on. I've ended up with a very weird definition here. All right, so sorry about that. I've got the wrong definition here, but let me just speak over this text. So with the policy, the whole idea is to set yourself a target. Set something which everything else can flow from, an idea, a concept. So for example, the Zulu discussion that I said there for the Zulu battle would be, their policy would be to get as close as possible for hand-to-hand combat. And then that flows into our actions. And our actions are a set of coherent actions that are designed to carry out the policy. These are steps that are coordinated with one another to work together in accomplishing the guiding policy. So as we had with the Zulu battle, if your policy was to get into hand-to-hand combat, what were the actions that got them there? And so that sort of bull strategy, the bull and horns, as it was known, was a brilliant, brilliant action that brought them closer into hand-to-hand combat. There were other components of their strategy that did that as well. For example, their initial plan was to go when it was dark. Unfortunately, they got discovered just before that, but that would have meant that they could even get closer to the British to be able to enact their policy. And so what I want to do is take it away from the military side of things and have a very, very brief discussion about the Bulungula incubator. And this is where we're going to start moving into the global development side of things, understanding the more social development side of strategy. So the Bulungula incubator is and I can't even describe it like succinctly in terms of the fact that it does so many different things. It exists in an area called Bulungula in the Eastern Cape in South Africa. And this area is one of the poorest areas in South Africa. They have a very high, or had a very high infant mortality rate, very high illiteracy rate, and there was no schooling no quality education available there. And so basically this community had all sorts of development problems. And what you'll often find with development is that people will go in with the idea, oh, we're going to fix this, and will just throw their own concept at it. They'll go in with a bunch of actions. And that's all right. Like there's some real great development that happens like that, but it's not as effective as it could be. It doesn't utilize its resources as best it can. And so what the Bulungula incubator tried to do is, and what they've been doing an incredible job of, is they've gone and done things very differently to traditional development. So the lady in the middle there, her name's Rejane Woodruff. Her and I actually studied the same degree, but she's probably about 20 years ahead of me. And what she did is she was at a big finance company. She was the chief economist at a big finance company in Cape Town. And she sort of came across this area and a project that was going on there. And her and her partner started understanding what the problems were there. Now, they didn't just come in with a big, we'll throw money at the problem, but they integrated themselves into the community. She quit her job at one point and moved into the community, and she sort of sat there and analyzed for years of what the problem was, what the real needs of the community was. And it wasn't just to build a big building as a community center, which is often the solution. What she understood was that there were specific gaps that needed to be filled. Everything from finding employment options to even giving people confidence. A lot of what she talks about is the mindset of people, understanding that they might not have access to resources, but even if they did, they wouldn't have the confidence to be able to use that. And that's what she recognized from being in there. And so they came up with a mission that went beyond regular development. And I'm going to read it out to you because it really, really is great. It says, our mission is to be a catalyst in the creation of vibrant and sustainable rural communities. We work with our community members from conception to career with an integrated development strategy in education, health and nutrition, and sustainable livelihoods. All projects are designed, prioritized, implemented, and managed in partnership with our community and through traditional and elected leadership structures. So instead of just coming from a top-down approach and having actions that just go in directly, what Rejane and her team did is that they took this in an incredibly thought-through set of steps. And for every project that they take on, so for example, with the education project, they don't go and hire people from outside the community to come and work and help the community. They train people from within the community who have a better understanding of the community to be able to execute on that project. There's a video here, but I'm not going to play it. I don't know how the sound is going to come across, but I've linked this video in the resources on my blog. I'll share that link again a little bit later. But it's a really, really great thing to go and look and understand what they do there. And so what I want to run through here is the three Roomalt components here very quickly in terms of being applied to the Bulungula incubator. So I'm going to just see if I can stop sharing my screen for a second. Hold up. and not stop broadcasting. Let's see. Is that right? You see me? Cool. Okay, so I think I'm back on board. I'm just waiting for my video stream to catch up. See if I've done that right. Looks like it's going all right. Oh, there we go. Cool. So, what I want to take from that story there, the Bulungula incubator, is to really look at what their diagnosis was, what their policies were, and what their action was. So, in terms of their diagnosis, as I said, they went into the community and they understood it properly. They went and unpacked the issues that were going on. Their diagnosis was more than just the fact that there was a high infant mortality rate. As I said before, a high infant mortality, something like having a runny nose is a symptom of what is potentially a different problem. And so with their diagnosis, they went in there and realized things like the fact that people didn't understand that, diarrhea for a child is not a life-threatening thing, that they could literally take rehydration fluids and be okay. And so it became not a medical problem, it became more of a education problem. So the way that they did their diagnoses was to spend time within the community. Secondly, in terms of policy, their policy has 2 or 3 components to it that I think are phenomenal, are very unique for a development project. The first thing that they do really well is that they look at the sustainability of the whole project. They try and make it as sustainable as possible. And the way that Rejane and her partner do this is they every 5th year on the project, they go and travel for a whole year. And they make sure that the community can entirely handle the incubator on their own. And I think this is one of the most unique situations I've ever seen in terms of development. And what that means is that for 4 years, they work really, really incredibly hard to make sure that in the year they're away, the community isn't dependent on them. And as I've heard Rejane say before, what she actually wants to do is end up in a situation where she works herself out of a job. If she does her job well enough, she won't have to be there. So that's one of their guiding policies. Another one of their policies is that the community must be involved in everything that gets done. So they do seek outside help, but when they are fixing issues, the community are there advising them. Some of the actions that they've taken, they've built a library and employed people within that library from the community, taught them how to read so that they can read to the children. They have set up a clinic. That clinic has people employed from the community who then help people within the community. And then they've set up farms for sustainable agriculture, and then again train people from within the community to manage that. So it really is one of the most phenomenal development projects I think I've ever seen. And so, yeah, that's a good example of the Diagnose Policy Action Framework being used for global development. I see we've got somebody joining us from Portugal. Hey, Scorpio Child 101. I think I know who that is. Okay, I'm going to move back to our slideshow now. Give me 1 second. Where did it go? Go. Okay, so the Bulungula Incubator is a fascinating example of strategy being implemented in development. And what I would really want you to take away from that story is that when looking at big issues like this, issues of health, education, sanitation, it may seem obvious what the problem might be, but if you really, really want to understand it, you need to go and dive in and unpack it properly. You need to go and diagnose the situation properly. And so what I'm going to do now is move on to our strategy tools. Now, these 2 tools specifically are my favorite strategic thinking tools after the Room framework. And yeah, I'll dive into them now. So the first one is from the University of Oxford. They've got a center there called the Skull Center, and they do a lot of social entrepreneurship work. And so with the Skull Center, what they've started is they have this idea of apprenticing with the problem. The idea that instead of just coming in from the outside and making a decision. You've got to go and sit with it and understand it properly. They started a competition called Map the System, and as part of the Map the System, they use something called the Impact Gaps Canvas. Oh, and by the way, the resources for this, especially these Impact Gap Canvas images, as well as information about the global competition, is available on the website. Map the System, if you either Google it or you can check it out on my blog. All right, so what does the Impact Gaps Canvas look like? So the idea is this. Instead of just diving in and seeing a problem and trying to put in a solution, there are two major components of the Impact Gaps Canvas. The first is challenge mapping. So this is looking at all of the different components of the challenge. What's happening, what's the impact of the challenge, and what's holding the challenge in place? What are the forces that are keeping it active? So these include things like describing the challenge, understanding the causes of the challenge, then looking and understanding sort of who stands to benefit if the challenge continues to persist. And also, one of the really important things that needs to be understood in these sort of things is the history of them. Where did it come about? How have we ended up in this situation? So that's sort of something that's really easy to understand. But I think the sort of genius in this Impact Gaps Canvas is the solutions mapping. So instead of just trying to implement something based on understanding the challenge, you also need to understand the existing solutions. So what models are already being tried, either in that location or in an internationally similar one? What resources are available to fix that problem? What efforts are already being done? And are these efforts linked up? Is there a sort of join up in the different efforts? Also looking internationally, what are the solutions that other organizations have used, other communities? Because a lot of the time you don't have to reinvent the solution to all of these things. You can really be able to you can work on them by copying other models, by looking at literature and evidence and stories from overseas. So for example, the Bulungula incubator model might work in other communities in Asia, in South America, wherever it might be. And then looking at the solutions mapping, it's also looking at, and most importantly, I think, the impact gaps canvas. So the impact gaps. So now that you understand both the challenge and the solutions, where are the gaps within the solution? Is there regulation that's missing? Is there knowledge sharing that's missing? Are we looking at unaddressed obstacles? And what are the lessons that we've learned from this? And so this is one way to take a development problem, something like the Bulungula situation, and really unpack it and understand what's going on. So if I was to apply this to Bulungula, I've got a blank canvas here for you to fill in for your own problems that you want to take on. But if I was to apply this to Bulungula, what I would look at is say that the challenges, for example, they were ones that we've already described. But on the side of the solutions, one of the big problems there was that there was very ineffective government, and there were various different organizations that were trying to help NGOs type things, but there was no coordinated action between them. And so part of what's interesting about the Bulungula Incubator is that they bring in all sorts of organizations into their system, and so that not everyone's working independently. So this is a really, really powerful tool to use when trying to understand the problem. And if we look back at the Diagnosed Policy Action Framework, this would fit under diagnosis and trying to analyze what's going on. The second is a model that is becoming used more and more frequently. This is not just the analysis side of things. It's called the theory of change. Now, this is something that I really actually struggled to understand the first time I came across it, because sometimes it just seems obvious. If you have somebody that is poor, surely you can just give them money and then they'll be rich. And that's not necessarily the case, because what might be happening along the way is that there are different components along your theory. There's different parts of your hypothesis that aren't tested or understood. And so this is what the theory of change looks like. And the first thing is your inputs or your program activities. What are you actually doing? So, like what is happening? What are the actions that are being taken? The second thing is the outputs. What are the results of those actions? Then your intermediate outcomes. So what does that do? What do the outputs then do? And then finally, how do those feed into your goals? So I'm trying to think of an example where this has been done badly. I want to let me actually talk about an example where this has been done well. I'll talk about that with the clothing bank in a second. But in terms of the theory of change stuff, in terms of the input stuff, that's often things like, let me use this example actually. So one of the examples that is used frequently by the organization that I was taught this by, the organization is called JPAL. Again, their link is on my site. So what JPAL did at one point is that they were trying to get people vaccinated in India. And it was free vaccination, and what they would do is that they'd have their program inputs, which were they'd have nurses and doctors arrive at a village with all of the resources they needed. And what was interesting is that they'd rock up and have all of these available resources, but they didn't manage to vaccinate more than 10% of the children that were there. And so if you look at the inputs and the goals, there was something that was breaking down in the middle. And so what they started doing is unpacking their theory of change. Where was it going wrong? The inputs were fine. They had all of the inputs arriving there on time. The nurses were rocking up. The medicines were there. But what was happening is that there was a breakdown between the inputs and the outputs, the take-up by offered participants. What they realized is that the participants wouldn't be able to come and have their children vaccinated because they would miss out on a day of work. And by missing out on a day of work, they missed out on a day of income. And so there was a cost, even though the thing was free, even though the program was free, there was a major cost to being there. And so what they started doing is, and it was actually relatively cheap to change the program, was that they started either giving cash for people that vaccinated their children, or giving food vouchers or actual food products. And by understanding that there was a breakdown between the inputs and the physical outputs, they were able to fix their entire theory of change and achieve their goals. And so what this does is, this tool is to analyze a strategy that you're setting out, understanding that it's more than just putting in inputs and getting out goals. If you can almost imagine this like a machine or a car, the thing that happens is that, if you put petrol in and it doesn't drive, it might be something with the engine, or it might be something with the battery. And what you're doing with the theory of change here is that you're looking at all of the components of your strategy to understand where it's going wrong. So I'd like to take you to my example for this section, which is on the Clothing Bank. So the Clothing Bank is an organization that was started in Cape Town by the lady on the left and the lady on the right, Tracy Chambers and Tracy Gilmore. So basically what these two... hey, I just was Cindy McCaza joined us. How's it, Cindy? All right, so what happened with the two Tracys is that they were both working in retail, and they realized that a lot of clothes got sort of thrown away by the major retailers in South Africa. And so what they did was they quit their jobs and they said, we're going to take these clothes, donate it to mothers and mothers in need, and they're going to go and sell these clothes and make money. And if we look back at our theory of change, that looks really great. Your inputs are your clothes. You have clothes that can then be sold by mothers, and they have now resources that they can use, and they could start generating income for themselves. And then the goals would be that they'd lift themselves out of poverty. Now, what Tracy Chambers on the left, they told us, is that in their first 2 years, even though they thought they had a fantastic plan, it didn't materialize in anything. They'd go to the women's houses and realize that all of the clothes that had been donated to them to sell were just being stockpiled up. And what they realized, if you go into your theory of change, is that they had their inputs. The inputs were being delivered. So the tangible products were getting an output. They were arriving with people. But there was no short-term behavioral change that resulted there. There was no intermediate outcomes, and that's why the goals weren't reached. And so what they did is they started changing their model and sort of understanding why their theory of change wasn't working. And what was absolutely fascinating about the two Tracys is that they realized that it wasn't a lack of resources that was keeping these women back. It was, in fact, an emotional, a mental health issue, a self-confidence issue. And really what was happening here was not that these women were being lazy, or not that they were not willing to do this stuff, but really it was a lack of confidence and even poor mental health, depression and anxiety that was really keeping them from going out and selling. And their assumption that they had there from the output to the intermediate outcome before was that a person would be entrepreneurial and it would be easy. What we miss is that being entrepreneurial requires significant internal motivation. And if people have mental health issues, if people have lack of confidence issues, you won't get that intermediate outcome. So what the two Tracys did is that they changed the model up. And they said, right, instead of just giving clothes to these ladies, we're going to first set them up with a support group, which is a proven way of building self-confidence and managing mental health. So instead of each of these entrepreneurs operating independently, they'd operate in groups of 8 now. Each one would sell their own things, but they'd all report into one another. The second thing is that when people graduated from the program, they would come back and mentor one of the groups so that they could pass on their knowledge. They could build in that self-confidence. And when somebody said, I can't sell, that person could then communicate. Then, and I think this is the masterstroke of what has made Clothing Bank such an incredible success, is that they employed psychologists as part of the program. They did, they went beyond just trying to give clothes to these women to get them to sell, and they started unpacking what the emotional side of things. They diagnosed the problem much better. And so from the point of the first year or two when they absolutely made no impact, they changed their theory of change. They understood their diagnosis much better. They understood the systematic problems that were going on much better. And now the Clothing Bank is one of the best social enterprises in the world. They recently won the, forgetting the name. At the World Economic Forum, they won Social Enterprise of the Year last year or the year before. And they train 400 women across South Africa every year to be entrepreneurial. And what they do is that the first year of the program runs with a psychologist, as I spoke about. In the second year, they sort of allow the woman to become more independent and mentor new women that are coming onto the course. And so this entire system, their entire theory of change, as we were discussing here, really got built to a point where it was having an impact. From when they started just giving stuff to when they realized that the inputs not matching the goals was because there were assumptions, there were hypotheses in the middle that they hadn't tested. And when they started adjusting their strategy to the situation, to understanding where the different gaps lay, that's when they started fixing things. So I've actually already reached the questions part, just on time actually, it's 45 minutes past. What I'd like to do very quickly is just go back to this here. So if you missed this at the beginning, the resources are available at tinyurl.com/GCM strategy, and the WhatsApp chat is available at tinyurl.com/GCM strat chat. If you type that second link into your phone, it'll take you automatically into the WhatsApp group. So now we have 10 to 15 minutes for questions. I'm going to go back to a picture of me. Hold up, and you can see my face again. And there we go. All right, so we've got about 15 minutes for questions. I'm also more than happy to tell more stories about different versions of strategy that I've seen. where strategy has been really effective. But if you want to use either the WhatsApp group or the chat box on YouTube to send a message, you can do so now. I'll give like a minute or two to see if anything comes through, and then I'll dive into some other things. Let's see. Ready. Oh, classes, no questions. We have this all the time. All right, so I'm going to dive into one more really great example of strategy that exists. Actually, no, what I can do is I'd like to show you my own implementation of the diagnosed policy action framework. Let's see if I've got it here. Give me 1 second. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly go through my own experiences with the Map the System challenge with my startup called AllSafe. I'm going to quickly share the screen for you, and I'll upload this as a resource as well when I get the chance. Let's see. Right, so as we discussed, well, as I taught you guys, well, showed you guys now, we have the impact gaps canvas from the University of Oxford. So in 2016, two friends and I started up a social enterprise called AllSafe. That's our little team there. That's me with a little bit less facial hair. And really what we did on this thing is that there was two major situations that took place. The first one was that in an affluent area in Cape Town, there was a girl that was raped and murdered. And then in a very poor area of Cape Town, there was also a girl that was raped and murdered. Their two names, Francisca and Sinompolo. And it really was one of the most tragic news stories of both of them. And we were sitting there one day and we were thinking to ourselves, why is the system like this? What exists? How do we exist in the 21st century with these sort of things going on? So what we initially did is that we launched an organization called AllSafe. We crowdfunded on Thunderfund, which is a crowdfunding site. We got onto some media. We developed an idea. And what we developed is that we saw the problem, and our immediate reaction was to develop a product. We said, we can fix this with a device that we'll develop. We'll develop a smartwatch. When you press it, it will immediately alert the police. And then when the police get the alert, they will arrive immediately and the entire situation will be solved. Started developing this idea, and we went to a sales day. We hadn't fully gone into production at that point, and we went to go and sell this product. And when we rocked up at the sales day, people loved our idea. They thought the smartwatch idea was brilliant, but nobody wanted to buy it. And that's when we realized that we'd done something very wrong. We hadn't properly understood the context. And so we started pivoting. We were lucky to be part of the global challenge Map the Problem. This is all of us at the University of Oxford. Well, not all of us. There's 3 of us in the group there that are from AllSafe. The rest of people from all over the world. And what we did is we changed our focus when we pivoted from just trying to develop a solution to properly understanding the environment and what the existing situation was. So the first thing we analyzed was the problem landscape. Part one of the problem landscape was contact crime. So the majority of crime that's committed in Cape Town was what's called contact crime. That's anything that includes personal robbery, rape, murder, or physical violence of any sorts. The second was a really interesting component of the problem landscape. What we have here is a map of Cape Town. The pink dots represent white people, the orange dots represent colored people, and the blue dots represent black people. And where you can see the blue and orange dots and densities there are known as the Cape Flats. They are the poorest region of Cape Town. And then what you can see in the pink dot areas is the wealthy areas of Cape Town. And the thing that beyond just the inequality was that in Camps Bay, which is one of the richest areas in the country, there's an average of 960 officers per 100,000 people. But in Khayelitsha, one of the poorest areas of the country, there are only 111 officers per 100,000 people. So there are 9 times more policemen in the rich areas than in the poor areas. Thirdly, in the South African Police Services annual report, they reported that it takes 18 minutes to arrive to an emergency situation. But what we found out is that that report excludes times over 30 minutes. So basically what that means is that if an emergency takes more than 30 minutes to respond to, they don't count it in the statistics, which is just completely mind-boggling. And so the majority of South Africans surveyed said that they think that sort of 60% of people thought that it takes more than 30 minutes for the police to arrive. So after understanding that problem landscape and the major components of those problems, we went and understood the solutions landscape. And this was just a map that we drew up. There's no sort of specific key to it, but these are all the different organizations that are involved in community policing, looking after the community. We've met on the ground. As I said, part of what's really, really important about development and strategy is going onto the ground and discussing things with people. This is me on a neighborhood watch with a guy called Frank. And what we did is that if you look on the left-hand side of that picture, we unpacked it and we realized that there were all sorts of government organizations, all sorts of private organizations on the right, all sorts of sort of semi-government organizations on the bottom there. And all of these were operating very independently from one another. So what we did is once we unpacked it, we understood that there are 3 missing links within the system. The first was that there is poor communication between major players. The second is that there's poor information sharing between them and the resources aren't integrated. And so if we put this in a theory of change framework, the intermediary outcomes that needed to happen was not just that crime needed to be solved, it was that better decisions needed to be made, needed to be a better allocation of resources, and there needed to be an improved response time as an intermediary outcome. And that would eventually result in a reduction in crime. And so this was just part of the analysis that we did to understand what was going on in the environment. We ran into some major problems in trying to take it from a concept into reality. And the reason was that because getting into any of those systems, any of those organizations you saw in that map, became an unbelievably difficult challenge. So this organization still exists. We are working on it, but the situation is far more complex than we ever thought it would be when we entered this scene. And so really the sort of understanding from that story is that having a good idea is fine. But when you properly analyze the environment, you can sort of not only validate an idea or invalidate it, you can also take it and make proper decisions, put a proper analysis together, and really put together strategies that would be far more effective than if you just come up with an idea by itself. And so, hold on, let's see if there's any questions. I've still got the chat open if anyone's got any questions. I can see all of you hiding there. This is what my class does too, by the way. 400 people and no one pops up with a hand. But if there aren't any questions, I'm going to gently start concluding. So what I really want people to draw from this, just to conclude and bring all of it together, is that strategy isn't as difficult as the big corporates make it sound like. These big strategic documents are nothing more than like big fancy words that are shown to investors. Really, what I want you to understand from here is that strategy can really be hinged on three principles, which is really understanding the problem, understanding where we are now, properly diving in and unpacking the problems as they are, apprenticing with the problems, going and understanding the problems, and really diagnosing them beyond just the obvious. The second is to really set a vision for what you want. Set an idea for where you imagine your organization, your project to end up. And then third is to develop an integrated set of actions, a sort of how do we get there. And really, this is the crux of strategy. If you keep those together, if you base your ideas and your planning and your strategic thinking on that, it can really take you far in being able to have an impact. I think I'm going to sign off now. As I said, all of the resources are available on my website. I'm just going to share those links again for you. Give me a second. Should know this better by now. Alrighty. So yeah, just a massive thank you to Courtney for putting this together and the whole Global Changemakers team. I really love the work that you guys are doing. If you do have any further questions, there's many different ways to contact me. My social media accounts are all at @AllSafe, and then I've got a website with a blog on it, www.rowanspazolli.com. My email address is there as well. Thank you for tuning in. I didn't expect such a big turnout. It really is cool to see the numbers of people that are watching this right now. And yeah, feel free to pop me a message if you have any questions. Thanks again to Global Changemakers for having me on board. Right, this is Rowan signing off. Cheers, everyone.